It's kind of weird, right? Younger generations making more than their parents did, but they're still struggling more. It's like, what's going on?
Yeah, I think it's more than just earning power. We're talking about a generational wealth gap.
Right, it's not just about how much you make, but also what you own, like
Mhm.
houses, investments, inheritances, all that.
Exactly. And how those assets appreciate over time. That's where things get kind of messy.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we've got a lot to cover. We've got economic data, political analysis, and even some social commentary. Should paint a pretty good picture.
Sounds good.
So where should we start?
Well, we have to start with the demographics. Can't ignore the baby boomers. Big generation, and they vote a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
In the 2024 election, 94% of eligible baby boomers voted.
94%.
Wow. Compare that to millennials barely hitting 60% turnout.
Huh. So that's got to have some impact, right? Like, do politicians just focus on what the baby boomers want?
Well, they do tend to cater to the biggest and most reliable voters. And when you look at the wealth distribution, the baby boomers, they're doing pretty well.
Right, so even if some millennials are out-earning their parents at the same age, they don't have as much overall wealth. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's the big picture. When boomers were in their 30s, back in the 90s, they held 21% of the nation's wealth.
And millennials now.
Millennials in their 30s today, less than 5%.
Whoa. That's a huge difference.
Right. It's like they're playing a whole different game, competing for houses, vacations, you name it, but with people who have way more purchasing power.
I guess that explains why so many millennials are still getting help from mom and dad, huh?
Yeah, it's a pretty clear example of the wealth gap in action.
For sure. But, okay, so how did we get here? What happened to cause such a big shift in wealth?
So to get that, we got to go back a few decades. The 80s were a turning point, economically speaking. Actually, if you look at these wealth distribution graphs from our sources, you can really see it.
Okay, yeah, I see that. I bet a bunch of things contributed to that.
Yeah.
Like, wasn't that around when automation and digitization started taking off?
Absolutely. Automation and digitization made things more efficient, but the gains weren't really shared equally. The gap between CEO pay and what the average worker makes started to, really take off.
So companies were getting richer, but the average worker wasn't.
Basically, yeah. And then there's this other big thing that happened. Trade with China, 1992, that was normalized.
Oh, right.
Opened up new markets, yeah. But it also meant a lot of manufacturing jobs got outsourced. So that impacted worker pay, too.
So it was like a bunch of stuff happened at once. Automation, globalization, and companies changing their priorities all led to this wealth gap.
Yeah, it was kind of a perfect storm.
Oh.
And to really see how big of a change it was, we can look at some examples like CEO pay.
Hmm.
That started skyrocketing in the 80s, just going up and up with the stock market. But what the typical worker made, that just stayed flat.
Two totally different realities. The people at the top are making a killing in the stock market,
Yeah.
but everyone else is like stuck.
Exactly. And the data shows it really clearly. Between 1989 and 2016, the poorest half of all U.S. households, their share of the wealth dropped from 4% to just 1.1%.
Wow, 1.1. That's crazy low. It really shows you how the middle class is shrinking, this big gap between the rich and everyone else.
Yeah.
But wait, there's another part of this, isn't there? The US dollar, isn't that worth less now too?
You got it. The dollar's buying power has been going down since the U.S. went off the gold standard. That was back in 1971.
Right. So even if you're earning more dollars, those dollars don't buy as much as they used to.
Exactly. It's like, think about this. In 1913, you could buy 30 Hershey's bars with $1.
30.
Yep. Now, in 2020, $1 could barely buy you a small coffee.
Oof. Yeah, okay. That really puts it into perspective.
Yeah, the dollar has really lost value. And it's all tied to the rising cost of living. And, the national debt's huge and keeps getting bigger, like $1 trillion every 100 days.
Every 100 days. Ugh.
Yeah, it's a lot. And the thing is, even though the prices of things are going up, people's wages haven't been going up at the same rate.
So it's getting harder for younger generations to even afford the basics, let alone save money.
You got it. We're even seeing reports that Gen Z will have mortgage payments that are almost twice as much as older millennials.
Double.
Yeah.
Man. So, okay, we've talked about the wealth gap, why it exists, all of that. But what does it mean in the long term? Like, not just for the economy, but for, politics and just society in general.
That's the big question, right? What are the consequences of all this? And that's what we'll be getting into next. This gap has a big impact, from politics to social trends, everything. It's like it all kind of feeds into itself. Baby boomers, they've got all this wealth and political power, so they want policies that protect that.
Yeah, makes sense, right? If you've worked your whole life to build wealth, of course, you want to keep it safe. But what does that mean for the younger generations, the ones trying to get started?
Well, it can make it harder for them, you know? It's like the system isn't really set up to help them buy a house, get an education, or just keep up with the cost of everything going up, up, up.
Right, and that's got to be part of why millennials and Gen Z are so disillusioned. Like, why even bother voting if no one's listening?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. And then there are these other trends, socially, like one source talked about how more and more young men, especially Gen Z, are just dropping out of the workforce altogether.
Really? That's kind of scary. Is it just because of the economy, or is there something else going on?
It's complicated, but the source said it was a bunch of things. Like they feel like there's no point, no good jobs, no chance of getting ahead, just this general feeling of what's the point?
And I remember that statistic, the one about young men and, you know, not having sex, 30% of them,
Yeah.
right? Is that tied to this whole feeling of disconnect?
The source said it could be, yeah. It's like it's
Okay.
a whole generation that doesn't know where they fit in, Like they can't afford to participate in the world.
Man, that's rough. It's like a whole generation's getting left behind.
And that's why we need to find solutions, policies that actually fix the root of the problem, this inequality, and help wealth get passed down between generations. It's got to be about building a future for these younger generations, not just protecting the past.
Okay, so what can we do? How do we, like, bridge this gap and make things more fair?
Well, it's a tough one, right? We need to do a lot of things. One big thing is making sure everyone has a fair shot at education and training,
Hmm,
getting the skills they need for today's world.
makes sense. Give everyone the tools they need to succeed.
Exactly. And we need to do something about the cost of living, too, especially housing. People talk about raising the minimum wage, rent control, building more affordable places to live.
Right, but what about the people at the very top, the ones with all the wealth? Can we do anything to, like, spread some of that around, make things more even?
Some economists are talking about a wealth tax, taxing the assets of the super rich. The idea is you use that money for programs that help everyone, not just the few.
So that's pretty controversial, right? But I have heard people talking about it more lately. But wouldn't that, like, discourage investment? People wouldn't want to put their money into things if they're just going to get taxed on it, right?
Yeah, that's a valid point. It's why we need to be smart about it, really think it through. The bottom line is we got to talk about how to create an economic system that works for everyone, for all generations, not just one.
So it's not a quick fix. It's not just about changing a few policies here and there. It's about, like, rethinking the whole system.
You got it. We need to think long term, not just for the next election, but for the future. What kind of world do we want to leave for the next generation?
So we've talked about the wealth gap, what caused it, what the consequences are. We've even talked about some solutions, even if there's no easy answer.
Hmm.
But what does all this mean for our listeners? Why should they care about this?
It's about understanding how things work, how this wealth gap affects everything, not just money, but politics, our relationships even, and what kind of future we're heading for.
It's like we all need to pay attention to this. We can't just sit back and watch it happen. We got to talk about it, demand better from our leaders, and think about the choices we're making every day.
Exactly. It's about thinking bigger than ourselves, bigger than just right now. It's about what kind of world we want for our kids and their kids and so on.
Yeah, it's like we're at this point where, like, things can either keep getting worse or we can actually try to change things. But it's not about blaming anyone or saying one generation's better than another.
Right. It's about realizing that a healthy economy needs everyone to have a chance, not just a few people at the top. We all benefit when everyone has a chance to do well.
Exactly. And that starts with, like, understanding what's going on, talking about it honestly, and, pushing for solutions that work for everyone.
For sure. It's got to be about more than just the short term, What kind of future are we building?
So, okay, we're wrapping up this deep dive. One last thing to think about. The current system seems to help the people who are already wealthy. What if there were other ways to, like, be financially secure and build something for future generations?
It's a good question, right? Maybe we need to change how we think about success. Not just about money, but about community, purpose, things that last.
Yeah, like maybe we need to look at different ways of doing things. New economic models, different ways to build wealth, different ways to measure how we're doing as a society.
Always good to question things, right? Always keep exploring, keep an open mind.
Thanks for listening to this Satoshi Chain podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe.